They're attempting to train you to suppress your emotions by invalidating your emotions when they present themselves. You're supposed to just accept emotional neglect as normal. Hello, truth tellers. Welcome back to the ADHD Scapegoat podcast, where we discuss everything ADHD and scapegoating. I'm Angie.
And I'm Jeremy, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about emotional abuse, from being raised in it to then being in adult relationships that are similarly toxic. And we also will share some self-assessment quizzes you can take to help you become more aware of what you are experiencing.
So let's talk about it. So Jerry-wise, I'm always sharing resources that I've found helpful throughout my healing journey. And Jerry-wise is a guy that I first heard on Dr. C's, what's his podcast called now? Navigating Narcissism, I think, is his podcast.
That's what we'll call it.
Yeah. I'll put it in.
We'll put it in the show notes.
We'll put info in there. It's escaping me right now. But he had him on as a guest, and he was really knowledgeable. He's a coach, and he's worked for like 45 years helping people basically pull out their patterning from their narcissistic families. And so he shares knowledge, all the techniques used by narcissistic or emotionally immature parents, and what you were trained into from birth, and how to separate yourself and find who you truly are. He's got a ton of great stuff. And in focusing on being raised in emotional abuse today, I went through the video for his narcissistic parents, the unacceptable abuse they trained you to tolerate. It's a really great video that he breaks down into 12 pieces that I thought really related, especially after having, this being, when this airs, it's January, sharing like the new year, the understanding, the education, really trying to learn all those new, maybe not new, but new awarenesses after the holiday season. We talked about how to spot narcissistic abuse in your family already. I had my sister on last episode talking about the family roles, and this is just diving a little bit deeper into some of those ways that emotional abuse was used against you. And when you're raised in that, you don't know it's your normal. And so you don't know any different moving forward. And until you go out and you're dating or you're trying to connect and have adult relationships, you either repeat the pattern or you wake up to the pattern. So when he first introduces it too in his video, he says, not that you like it or agree to it, it's just this is what you were trained, and this is the behavior that you were taught to accept. And so that's where we'll go with this. So the first one he talks about is gaslighting. And that's denying reality, twisting the truth, or making the children question their own perceptions, which makes those children grow up and they all think, that's the way this works. This is just, that's normal to be denied your own reality. And maybe I wasn't thinking that.
Makes
right?
you question yourself.
All the time.
Or you question your instincts.
Right. And we've talked about this before, but like the whole idea of the person trying to control and manipulate the situation, trying to get you to deny your own intuition, deny your own anger, deny your feelings, so that they can be relied on to control all of those aspects of you. So first one's gaslighting. The second one is emotional manipulation. Now, that can be like guilting you, shaming you, shifting responsibility onto you. My parents didn't really do the guilt, like, I feel like in my head, traditional, like, kind of Catholic guilt, like, oh, you're going to be sad when I'm gone, or like different things like that we didn't really hear that. There was less like guilt on not spending time with them because they leaned more towards the neglect and abandonment side. But the meeting of their emotional needs instead of the parent meeting the child's emotional needs, that definitely happened. The third one is shaming and criticism. So he says in his video, relentless criticism. And that hit me, and it hit me hard. I was, criticism is one thing, but it really was relentless. Like being made to feel like I'm never good enough, or the outward direct comparisons to my siblings or anyone else in attempt to make me feel shameful for who I am, or to disregard my feelings, or again, to stop listening to my intuition.
You shared, so in a previous episode, we shared that stat where ADHD or neurodivergent children experience...
It's like 20,000 more
right.
negative messages in their lifetime.
Right. So do you think that you being an undiagnosed ADHD child contributed to some of that shaming and criticism? Or was that just... that was part of it, but maybe were you subjected to more than your siblings?
I almost think that stat would be different if it was looked at for the combined ADHD child in a narcissistic family unit. Because I probably had more than that.
Sure. It was already coming at everyone.
Right.
But then you were specifically targeted because you would speak up or say, this doesn't feel right. No, that's wrong.
Right.
So then you were subjected to more ridicule.
Right. Because of the whole, I'm not easy to control. I didn't fall prey to these shaming. Like, I never felt any shame. I just felt misunderstood. And having that internal, whether it was just my inability to understand why, or it was just like my ADHD shouting, no, you don't understand, I think there's probably more negative messages coming toward the child who not only has ADHD, but is in a narcissistic family unit. The fourth thing is the silent treatment and emotional withholding. So instead of addressing conflict, narcissistic parents withdraw communication and punish their children with silence. And as a scapegoat, it told me that I needed to accept neglect and abandonment, and that I should avoid confronting problems altogether. I was bringing drama. I was always, what's your problem? Why do you care about this? So thank goodness my ADHD brain could not do any of that. So I had to address the conflict. And yes, there were times where, for my own safety, I had to protect myself and maybe not fight in that moment, but it didn't mean I still didn't hold that need to resolve the conflict, whether it was in my mind, my own understanding, my own education, grow my own awareness. But it definitely was always there. I still needed to understand the problem because it wasn't me. The fifth one is triangulation. So playing different family members against each other. And we talked with Val about this. And this is one of the biggest weapons that is still used by my toxic family members. My father would pit us against each other constantly and creating so much confusion between me and my siblings that we couldn't trust each other fully, even into adulthood. I'm still building all of that back with Val and my younger brother, like really relearning all of those triangulation messages that were ingrained in them. And for me, knowing that they had this ingrained message and they at one point were on the side of the attacking me, I have to build up my trust and my communication in being able to accept that triangulation doesn't exist anymore, and it's they don't allow it.
Except it is still happening. I mean, just a few years ago, or maybe even more recent than that, your dad said something to your younger brother about he wanted to call you or something. What was that scenario where he said he was going to talk to you and your dad made a comment like, well, why would you talk to her? What do you guys have in common?
Yeah, no, it was after we visited when I was pregnant with Otis, and we visited them, and they were just having a regular, catch up, whatever, phone call with my dad, and he said something about, like, they were saying, oh, the visit was great, the kids got along so well, and he said, oh, okay, I was wondering how that was going to go. You guys don't have anything in common. And my sister-in-law was like, huh? What do you mean by that? And she said she kind of like laughed it off and was like, huh? Just really confused by it. But it's just like little things like that.
Still planting the seeds.
Still.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was, 6 years ago.
6 years ago, yeah. So
but
that's still fairly...
Right, right.
We're 42. Some of us are 43 years old, but, we're in our late 30s and your dad is still trying to triangulate is just crazy.
Well, and I think the point in sharing, that's a great example because it's not just, these blatant, obvious forms of triangulation, like your sister was valedictorian and you're not good enough, or be more responsible like your brother, any of those outward things, they happened as well. But then there's also these sneaky forms of just trying to be like, and it almost, to me, when I was told that story, was like trying to plant, we have nothing in common, meaning they're better than me. My brother and his wife are better than me, and they should, so trying, almost like propping them up to be like, you're better than her, so why would you spend time with her? So it's kind of like trying to nudge himself into their good side and build up their, trying to find a little bit of their ego that finds that pleasing so that they will not go straight to negative messaging from him. The sixth one is blame shifting, scapegoating, denial of responsibility. And this is me completely. They tried to create a pattern of unjust blame directed at me so that I would internalize that blame, feel guilt and shame, and just be like their emotional trash bin. It didn't work on me, but it did create a pattern of blame that was mostly accepted from my siblings and my mother. In most cases, that was their go-to narrative about me, was to blame me, to scapegoat me. It's Angie's responsibility and no one else's. 7 is love bombing and withdrawal, basically just unpredictability and confusion. So I look at this as just conditional love. If you're behaving the way that works for them, then you're accepted and not attacked. It's not necessarily you're praised by any means, which me and Val talked about. You're not like given a great job or, pumping up in a way that maybe a partnership love bombing works. But it's similar in if you're behaving, then you're accepted and you're just not attacked. So not being attacked doesn't necessarily mean there's not abuse going on, if that makes sense. But if you do something they disapprove of, then you will abruptly get the silent treatment. And that's exactly what happened, especially with my mom, because she even said that to Val during a phone conversation. Like, I don't like the way you and Angie handled this, but never any explanation of what, or a conversation with each of us separately or together about what was going on or what she didn't disagree with or what she disagreed with, what she didn't approve of. There was no conversation. It was just, well, I don't like how you handled it, and so that's why I'm not talking to them. and this is confusing. You feel unstable, and it's ingrained in you as a kid with this just being what goes on, that this becomes your relational pattern that you carry into adulthood. You accept this hot and cold behavior as normal. Love is earned through compliance, right?
That's what I always say. I'm joking.
No. Eighth one is over control and invasion of privacy, like monitoring and micromanaging. So the micromanaging part is the part I related to on this one. The whole his way or the highway mentality about everything and his need to look perfect to the outside world, and him being my dad. His control was relentless, repetitive, and just utterly taxing. You would just want it to be over. And neglect was, again, more often used than this, especially when it came to me. And in doing healing work and looking back, I believe that was intentional. Like, I'm not going to waste my time trying to explain to you because you're worthless type of attitude. And I think part of it was self-preservation on his part, because telling me how to do something, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask, why can't I do it my way? It's going to be more work for him. And that wasn't his game that he was going to play. So number 9 is emotional over-dependence. So we needed to make sure we didn't make him mad, or we needed to make sure we didn't make my mom feel bad. Like, any time you would have your own emotions, it was deemed as selfish, and you were told that. I don't remember hearing my siblings being called selfish, but I'm sure they were at different points. But I heard it a lot. And them using this technique was teaching us to be codependent and self-sacrificing. So as you go into adulthood, you feel like you need to make other people happy, even to your own detriment. So you don't have any authentic needs or wants. And if you do, then you're selfish, just like they told you. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Number 10 is control by fear causing anxiety. So fear was literally the only form of discipline we experienced. Threats, intimidation, belittling, all leading to abandonment, punishment, which was usually grounding for an unknown amount of time, and physical abuse sometimes.
But we've also talked about how that fear-based punishments don't resonate with ADHD people, right? So that must have made it especially hard on you when his method of intimidation and belittling worked on some of your other siblings. You probably offered some feedback or pushback.
Yeah, and I think it also, I was punished no matter what. So the threat of being grounded, well, I wasn't allowed to do anything anyway, so that didn't hold any weight. And the threat of, the fear of, being spanked or something. Well, it was going to happen anyway. Like, I wasn't believed no matter what, and there was always a way to bring the blame back on me. So all of the fear for me mostly was the fear of abandonment that worked on me, because I just wanted connection. And so his fear, him using fear and intimidation as a control that worked on me, was the abandonment and connection, because he knew that I craved that. He knew that I valued that. He knew that I would give that to him. So he used that tool.
Weaponized it.
Against me.
That's awful.
It is. The 11th one is emotional invalidation. This was another big one for me. Belittling their child's emotions, like telling them they're overreacting or saying this isn't about you, selfish. Like, stop making this about you. Always stop making this about you. When I went to my big brother about trying to reach out to my sister, this isn't about you. Like, stop being so selfish. I'm like, I'm trying to contact her and have a relationship with her and communicate. How is that making this about me?
That was the first thing that you were met with.
Right.
Well, don't make this about you.
And it was like, huh?
Yeah, that's very confusing.
Yeah. And so, like, they're attempting to train you to suppress your emotions by invalidating your emotions when they present themselves. So you're supposed to just accept emotional neglect as normal. And then the last one he shares is a boundary violation. So where they overstep or just completely ignore your boundaries. And again, it's more on the side of neglect and abandonment for my family, but I think within those boundaries, it's looked at as we're not allowed to set boundaries or to individualize, make choices for ourselves because that's selfish. And because if we're making choices for ourselves that don't reflect them in a positive light, which is all they care about, that's where the boundary violations for them are. It's not okay for you. I mean, it goes back to the part where the one where my mom was like, I don't like the way you handle this situation, so I'm just going to, give you the silent treatment. I'm not going to talk to you about it. Those are the things, like, I don't like the way you handled that. That doesn't look good for me. So I'm done.
Right. They set the boundaries.
Right.
You are not allowed to set a boundary. They set the boundaries, and then you either you're overstepping the boundary that they set, or you just adhere to it, and then everything's fine.
Well, and their boundaries aren't even really boundaries. They're just threats and emotional abuse tactics, period. They don't understand how boundaries work. Because you're not allowed, like, remember we were talking about, like, asking a question and my parents acting like we were talking back? And, like, there was, like, a text thread with my whole family, and my mom said something along the lines of, we didn't raise you to treat us like this. And it was like, how are we treating you? We're asking a question. We're calling out the reality of this situation and saying this isn't okay.
Which was toxic behavior. And
right, it's toxic because you're not aligning, you're not falling into line, you're not falling into your role, you're not just blindly accepting what we decide.
Right. I mean, the perfect example of boundary violation is the day after our wedding. We've talked about this before. Your dad sent a message to the entire family and said, this was the last event that I will attend without and then it was his girlfriend at the time. It's his wife now, but he put his foot down the day after our wedding. I will not attend anything else without her. That was the ultimatum, his quote unquote boundary. And we were all just expected to accept it. Now, our boundary was, you need to explain why you walked out on our mother and left a note for your younger sister to find, didn't tell us where you were going, sent us cryptic texts. And,
right. There's a complete avoidance of talking about the events that and it was never about his girlfriend or his wife. It was about his broken relationship with us that he never resolved, and that's the whole thing. He pretended to put in the work so he could appear at our wedding and walk me down the aisles, because that would look horrific if he didn't. People would ask questions if he didn't walk me down the aisle. But so it felt to me, I said, this is my boundary. In order for for us to work on our relationship, for me to trust you, we need to have discussions. We need to heal. I need to understand, why these things have happened. And I need us to actually have a genuine connection of trust in order for me to trust you walking me down the aisle. This is an important time. And then, literally the next morning, it was like, it was all for nothing.
Yeah, let's not even call it a boundary.
No,
it was an ultimatum.
It was an ultimatum, and it was
and a threat.
It was a betrayal of all the work that we had done. It all felt phony. It was
100%.
It
because
was to put on so that he could still look good in the public eye. So when you look at these signs of emotional abuse that were inflicted on you as a child in this system, we can understand how this pattern repeats in adult relationships. And I alluded to some of them. But if we don't understand that and we don't become aware of what's healthy, that will present itself. So I pulled up an article from Psych Central that I had saved where they talk about signs of narcissistic abuse in being able to see it in your adult relationships. And the first one, again, is gaslighting. So using the manipulation to force you into thinking your thoughts and feelings are incorrect. And that being used in a relationship, especially in the beginning, is always, a little playful. But if you grew up in it, it feels totally normal. It feels like, oh yeah, maybe I am being flighty or forgetful or making a bigger deal out of it than I should be. And so they're allowed to continue their abuse. And the love bombing, they talk about, and this is, of course, more prevalent in a partnership and an adult love relationship. And so they'll shower you with love and attention and affection, and then criticism and distance, and then go back to right before they see you about to be like, had enough. All right, now I'm going to love bomb you again. And so that follows straight from your parents having you emotionally codependent on them. Now in your adult relationships, you're emotionally codependent on this person that is hot and cold with you. The lack of empathy, again, dismissing your feelings, emotionally invalidating, like we talked about with the parents. So ignoring your needs, being indifferent when you're struggling, being just like, they don't care what's happening with you. And I think the part of the coming from the parents showing that by example, and, I think a lot of times my younger sister specifically seeing how I was abandoned and there was no empathy for me really kept her quiet and being like, I need to conform.
Yeah, it conditioned her to keep her mouth shut, stay in line. I don't want that treatment.
Right. And there was always like this build up from my dad, like we're tough, we can handle anything. And that was like used as like a get over yourself and toughen up. You don't have any needs. Why do you have needs? Type of behavior. So then the constant criticism and blame, that comes up on this list too. Again, relentless criticism. So small things, making you feel inadequate. Any problem in the relationship is turned back on you. The excuses, you made me do this. If you hadn't done A, I wouldn't have done B. So the isolation. So that's one that we didn't really talk about on the parenting list, but I talked about a little bit previously, where being isolated from, regular connections with friends outside the house, or, just constantly having this gossipy, negative talk about people outside the house would isolate you. And, my parents my dad used to make us feel like everyone was out to get us and they weren't really our friends. So we had this lack of trust outside of our family unit, but then we didn't receive any of that nurturing of a friendship from our family unit. So it was really isolating and confusing. And the fact that we weren't allowed to go and see how normal families lived on a regular basis, it kept us from seeing how toxic our family is. And isolation, when it comes to a partnership later in life, they isolate you from your family and friends and your support systems, creating this conflict to make them feel like it's us against the world. And again, the narrative of saying these people don't care about you, what makes you think they care about you? They treated you this way one time, so this is what they think. I'm going to tell you what they think in order to separate you from the people that actually support you. And then the walking on eggshells. So I think this would relate most closely to the emotional manipulation side. You need to soothe them. You need to make sure you're not setting them off. You have to be overly cautious. Really think of how me coming to any conversation, I had to have basically a script and a plan of action and a way to defend myself and think of all the ways that they're going to try to come at me with their misunderstandings. And that's the same thing with a partnership. If you're walking on eggshells, there's this emotional instability caused by them. You should be able to have conversations. You should be able to have hard conversations, bring things up that make you uncomfortable, understanding where the other person's coming from. So in looking at those and seeing how those things can present, I know it's hard to see, and some of the things in standalone situations can be minimized by outside people when you're trying to talk to them. That's why going to therapy and finding these abuse resources is really how you will empower yourself. But I wanted to share a couple quizzes that you can go take. If you take just a few minutes, DomesticShelters.org has a pop quiz. Can you identify emotional abuse? And it takes you through these questions, and you pick A or B, and then at the end they try to break it all down and explain it to you. And it's a really, really well quick little quiz, but it's really well done to help you identify it. And after that, if you do recognize that it is emotional abuse, or even if you just want to look at this other one, it's a danger assessment, and it's sharing how dangerous the abuse is that you're dealing with. And it's a good quiz to see what is the, more of where's the escalation bound to happen given all of these emotional abuse boxes can be checked, because it does escalate. Because you get numb to all of the negative comments. You get numb to the silent treatment. You almost welcome it sometimes because it's not being attacked, right? There's all these different ways that you, in order for your own survival, you need to adjust. And so they have to escalate in order for you to hear them, or in order to get you to comply. So go over and take those. I'd love to hear back on what you found and what you understand now. And we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, in the future. Take care. Bye.